cover the overview. So basically who the Low Pay Commission are and what we do, and then talk about how we plot the path of the national living wage, and then the challenges that we've had. So Low Pay Commission, established in 1997, it's independent from government, and we make recommendations to the government on the rates and workings of the UK national minimum wage. Our recommendations are set out in an annual report. We make the recommendations, but it's the government that decides whether to accept or reject them. Prior to 2016, our objective was to set minimum wages as high as possible without any detriment to employment. And indeed, that remains the objective for younger workers and the youth rates below the national living wage. However, between 2016 and 2020, the government set the Low Pay Commission a target for the national living wage of reaching 60% of median earnings by 2020. The Low Pay Commission is a social partnership made up of 3 commissioners from with an independent background, 2 academics and the chair, 3 with a trade union or employee representative background, and 3 with an employer business background. We're an evidence-based, we take an evidence-based approach. We consult with stakeholders and call for evidence. We conduct internal analysis, research, and have an extensive international network to make comparisons with other countries. We process for setting the minimum wage is basically the government gives us a remit in the early new year and asks us to make recommendations for forthcoming minimum wages by the end of October. 2020, we had a new challenge. So the government accepted our recommendations resulting from our youth review in 2019 to lower the age of eligibility for the national living wage to 21. It was 25 at the time. But it also set us a new target of increasing the national living wage from 60% of median hourly earnings for those aged 25 and over to reaching 2/3 of the median earnings of those aged 21 and over by October 2024, taking economic conditions into account. The new target implies faster increases in the national living wage than had been the case between 2016 and 2020. We also had the challenge of the uncertainty around Brexit, and then we had the pandemic. So our remit for this year is similar to that for last year. It's for us to monitor and evaluate the national living wage, make recommendations that should apply from April 2022, and to reach 2/3 of median earnings by 2024. Last year, the national living wage age of eligibility was reduced to 23 from 25, and we've been asked to reduce it further so that it applies to all workers aged 21 and over by 2024. We're also asked to take economic conditions into account. So how do we actually plot the path? Well, we project the median. So we work out what the current level of wages are, upon which to base our estimates. We then calculate how wages have grown between that baseline and current information. And then we project from where we are now out to 2024. And then we plot the annual path by how to get to that target in 2024. So in more detail, projecting the median, the baseline that we use for our projections are the earnings from the annual survey of hours and earnings, which is regarded by ONS as the best structural earnings measure in the UK. The measure of earnings we use is gross hourly earnings excluding overtime and premium for those in the relevant age group. So for April 2021, that would be those aged 23 and over. And in April 2019, I'll talk about concerns about the 2020 ASH in a moment, but in April 2019, that was £13.64 an hour for those aged 23 and over, and £13.83 for those aged 25 and over. So having got the baseline, we then project wage growth from that baseline. So in this case, from April 2019 to currently. There's no suitable, reliable, timely measure of wage growth that's consistent with our ASH median. So as a proxy, we use the ONS measure of average weekly earnings total pay. It's also the measure that's most commonly forecast by various independent forecasters. And the AWE is available monthly with a 6-week time lag. So the latest data released was on Tuesday, and that covered the period to the end of July. We don't just take the headline rate, we use a smooth measure in order to try and move some of the volatility, and that's been really important considering what's been happening to wages over the last 18 months or so with the pandemic and with furlough. And we also check for the sensibleness of that measure against alternatives, so the AWE regular pay and the RTI monthly pay and median pay as well. From that sort of like the current data, we then project out wage growth to 2024. Our target is based sort of on what the median will be in October 2024. So we have to try and make an estimate of where that will be. And for the forecast we use the HM Treasury Panel of Independent Forecasts. That consists of Citi and other institutions. Usually there's around about 16 to 20 short-term wage forecasts and 9 to 10 medium-term ones. The short-term forecasts are for this year and next, and they're published monthly. The medium-term ones are published quarterly, but they cover a further three years, so taking us currently out to 2025. We also add in a forecast from the Bank of England and those from the Office for Budget Responsibility. The Bank of England publishes theirs quarterly. OBR generally publishes theirs around the time of fiscal events, which is usually March and November. And we take the median of those forecasts made in the last 3 months. So we remove forecasts that have been made further ago than 3 months. And that sort of provides our median for 2024. And then having projected that, we estimate the value or the bite of where we are, so the proportion of the minimum wage compared to the current median, and then we use equal increases to get to the 66.7% of to reach the bite by 2024, and that's even increases over the 4-year period. However, in the final, and that's for those aged 23 and over in the final year, 2024, because that just covers those aged 21 and over, the 2024 number relates to reaching the 2/3 median for that age group in 2024. So the challenges that we had in 2020, coming up with our recommendations last year, working arrangements were affected. The Secretariat was working from home. We had fully remote meetings, including additional commission meetings for catch-ups. We also had what was very difficult, our virtual retreat. Normally we, in making our decisions, we have 2 or 3 days in October where we go away to a hotel in the middle of nowhere and lock our commissioners basically in a room until they agree unanimous recommendations. It was much harder last year because of the, well, A, because the retreat was held virtually, and B, because of the economic uncertainty surrounding the pandemic and the impact that had on the quality of evidence. So we were also affected by the quality of evidence and ability to gather it. That affected our visits around the country. It affected our stakeholder engagement. It affected our commissioned research and what could be investigated or not, and it also affected the official data sources. The main data source affected was ASH in 2020, and that was affected because basically 25% of the workers in the sample were on furlough. So about 25% of the workers in the sample were getting somewhere between 80% and 100% of their normal wages. We weren't sure exactly what percentage they were getting because employers could top up the basic furlough payment from the government. So we had no consistent estimate of the median in 2020 upon which to benchmark the target. And what we mean by no consistent estimate, no estimate that was consistent with previous years' ASH. So we didn't really know where we were on the path. Added to that, we also had the economic uncertainty of COVID, compounded by further uncertainty over Brexit. At the time we made our recommendations, vaccines were not around. There was speculation that there might be some vaccines. The first announced successful vaccine, I think, was the 9th of November. We made our decision on October 30th. The day after we handed our recommendations to the government, they announced the November lockdown in England. So it was lots of uncertainty last year, and the range of wage forecasts and GDP forecasts were much wider than usual. And that meant that because of that inconsistent measure back in 2020, it meant we had to benchmark back to April 2019 and project from there. That therefore increased further uncertainty around our estimates, which we were projecting for longer periods of time. In terms of the implied path, you can see for the table, the ASH 2020, if you include furloughed workers or exclude them, it makes a big difference. If you include furlough workers, there's lots of workers there on 80% of pay. So therefore that pushes down any estimate of the median. If you exclude furlough workers, you're excluding 25% of the workforce, and many of those were also low paid workers. So you'd be skewing the measure of median upwards, so that you can see that there's a big difference in the target path, depending on whether you included or excluded furlough workers. So because there was no way of waiting to get some sort of intermediate measure, we used the baseline of ASH 2019, and that gave a on-path, on-course rate of £9.06 for last year. However, economic circumstances meant that in order to best balance the desire to increase pay with the need to protect employment, recommended that the NLW rate should increase by 2.2% to £8.91. That was a modest increase, but higher than the then forecast increase in prices, meaning that we expected low paid workers' living standards to be protected. But as you can see, it was 15 pence below the on-course path. The inability to use ASH complicated any attempt to work out the next step on the path. The uncertainty around the pandemic and economic recovery also clouded the issue. However, we did recommend that we shouldn't change the government's target of reaching 2/3 of median earnings by 2024, and that we would take stock of that this year. So the 2021 rate recommendations were much more cautious than those implied by the on-course rate. The on-course rate would have been around 4.5% to 5%, and we made a recommendation of 2.2% for the national living wage, and slightly lower rates for youth. For the youth rates, as the furlough and unemployment seem to be affecting young people more than older workers. So in our consultation in March, we updated this path, and we published our latest path, and we projected that in order to reach the 2/3 target, pay would need to rise to around £9.42 next April, and £9.96 in April 2023, and £10.33 by 2024. So that was what we published in March. That's sort of a comparison of those paths. Please note that pre-pandemic, wage growth and wage forecasts were much stronger, and we were projecting that the target number at the end of 2024 would be a minimum wage of around £10.69. last year at our retreat and this year in the consultation, that number is much lower. However, wage growth and forecast wage growth has been higher in recent months, as you probably are all aware. But the NLW has increased its real and relative value since 2016. However, after the sharp increase in 2020, which was the 6% increase from £8.21 to £8.72, the increase last year of 2.2% is likely to turn out lower than average wage growth, although we don't have the data to show that yet, which means that the bite or its value relative to the median is likely to have fallen, which means it's a bigger step to catch back up in order to meet the target by 2024. So the challenges this autumn, as well as the uncertainty that's been evident in recent years, we still have questions around the quality of evidence and the ability to gather it. However, with some mitigations, particularly our stakeholder evidence gathering has proved difficult in terms, or did prove difficult last year in terms of contacting businesses and workers. However, this year, with everyone more used to IT and virtual meetings, we've had a vast improvement on our access, particularly to workers, particularly supermarket workers and social care workers, and that's been very enlightening and very informing. They will also have official pay growth. It's very strong, but lots of that is driven by compositional effects. There's fewer low-paid workers in the economy, as for example, hospitality is one of the lockdown sectors that's been affected, and many workers and they were either laid off or haven't worked. Young people were also less likely to get jobs during this period, so that puts downward pressure on wages. And we don't know whether those whether the composition of the labour force has those changes are temporary or permanent, and how much of that change will persist into the medium to longer term. So again, we have wage forecasts that are much wider than usual. Similar challenge to last year in setting out the benchmark path. As I said, the path requires some catch up with the integration of. We also have 3 new commissioners who haven't yet met as a group in person, which creates additional complications, particularly when we come to make our recommendations at our retreat on the 20th to 27th. And we're also in the remit looking at sleep-ins and domestic workers. Just to note something on wage growth measures being skewed by compositional and base effects. So the Bank of England last month published what they thought these compositional effects were. So the dark blue line on the left-hand side is the actual private sector regular pay growth published by ONS. The lighter blue line is the impact of furlough. So basically, for workers on furlough, they're only on 80% of their minimum their wages. So if that's reflected in the official records, then the underlying rate would actually increase if you when those furloughed workers get back to work and get back to being paid 100% of their wages. However, there's the compositional effects which result from, as I say, fewer low-paid workers in the workforce. So the employment effects have been mostly in hospitality, among young people, and among part-timers who are all likely to be paid less. And we see that the headline of over 7% growth in pay, once you take out those compositional effects, falls back closer to 3%. Similarly with the RTI, their measure of annual growth is currently quite high and sort of above 5%. However, if we look at the median, so if we take everyone's individual pay growth over the last year and then take the median of that, which is the lighter blue line, we get much lower average wage growth. And the pay settlements data also suggests that there's been no huge upswing in pay. So quickly in terms of our next steps, The ASH, so the main data source that we rely on, will be published on the 26th of October. The new, we do have pre-release access for our purposes. The new national minimum wage, national living wage rates will be announced at the budget on the 27th of October. That will be accompanied by our letter to the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State for Business and the Prime Minister, along with the short report explaining our recommendations. Our more substantive report will be published in early December, alongside our commissioned research, including one project by our hosts here today, IDR, and we'll also be publishing a review of the National Living Wage Phase 1, so that's the meeting of the 60% target by 2020, and we'll be publishing that early next year. So, thank you.